Hello everyone, welcome to another series of home buyers and sellers videos. Today I have a great guest, Jeff Kahane with the Kahane Law, and we'll be talking about the most common legal mistakes that the home buyers make. So Jeff, what you can tell us about it?
Yeah, so we have lots of different issues that come up, and I think they all stem from maybe one kind of thing. Is when people buy a house, at least from our perspective, they're so excited. They might go to IKEA 20 times before they pick out a bed, and they see their houses, but then when you see the right one, they're writing offers right away. And it's when you're writing the offer, you want to make sure that you think about the purchase contract as a legally binding document and not just a form to get a house. So as a buyer, it's really important to understand what it is you're signing, your obligations, your responsibilities, to make sure that you know what it is that you're getting into. One of the biggest things that people do in terms of making mistakes is due diligence issues. It's still buyer beware. So as a buyer, we really want to make sure that you're looking for things that are important to you. Yeah. So, get a home inspector, of course. Make sure you have financing.
Right.
Don't sign a waiver until you really know that you're okay buying this property. But if there's things that are also important to you, make sure you have that communication so that you're properly represented. You can ask sellers questions like, did you ever have water damage? Or if you're really concerned about electrical, you can get an electrician in to look at things. You can get engineers in to look at things. Whatever's important to you is really key.
Right.
And when it's going fast, really look at everything, because sometimes people, they take possession of the house. Oh, this is all scratched and this is bad. Like, it was probably like that beforehand. It didn't all get scratched during the move.
For sure, right?
Yeah,
that happens often, right?
It does.
Things being hidden behind the clothing in the cabinets and everything else, right?
Yeah, and you're investing a lot of money in a property.
Correct.
So it's important that you just take your time, and it doesn't have to take hours and hours and hours, but just be thorough. Tell people when they're buying a brand new property is go each room, take a look at it, look behind the doors, see if there's big dents or things, and just take your time to get to know it. And the same is true for the other kind of things on a property. So your home inspection, make sure you spend the time with the home inspector. You'll learn a lot about your home. It's going to be really important for you down the road. In terms of other errors that people make is just making things are properly drafted. We work together really well. So
Correct.
If there's a unusual situation that you're concerned about, we can all talk about it and figure out how do we best protect you as a buyer in terms of the contract, so that if the seller's saying they're going to do something, that we really try and word it in a way that's protective. We see that all the time, where I'd say 90% of holdback clauses or clauses where a seller's going to do something different are just worded so poorly that there ends up being problems.
Correct, right. And I think recently we actually work on a couple of contracts where we worked together to put proper terms and
Yes.
make sure that the buyers and sellers are protected.
And don't be scared. Like, lawyers have this horrible reputation.
Yeah.
Hey, we're not going to charge you extra money because we're helping to draft the contract properly. It's better for you. It's better for you, the home buyer. It's better for us when we're working with the other lawyer when things are going through in terms of the transaction itself. And so it's really a win-win-win to have things drafted properly.
Correct, right? Very important. Getting the contract done properly is thing number one.
Yeah, and it is a legally binding contract. So, I'd encourage everyone to actually read it. Most people don't, because, it's like, who reads when you rent a car, the whole details.
Right. People are so excited
Yes.
getting into a new home. They
Yes.
just want to get it done, right?
Yeah, but really, it's good to know. And again, that communicating of any concerns to make sure that you've got things looked after.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you. Appreciate it.
One of the other things, we've talked about this already, is the financing condition to make sure you have funds, is really make sure that you've had that open communication with your mortgage specialist so that you know it's safe to remove your condition. Sometimes we have people who are waive conditions because they think they understood that it was okay. I always suggest get it in writing from your mortgage person. Yes, there are no outstanding conditions. This mortgage is certain. Go ahead. And then don't change your financial situation until after the mortgage is funded. So don't go out and buy, cars or F-150s. Don't go to, the furniture store and buy all your furniture on credit. Don't pay for 3 years' time. Don't quit your job These are all things where if the bank finds out, they could say, we're not funding the mortgage anymore. Right. And that could be a big problem. So, really important. From a logistics standpoint, we always suggest, and again, people are excited, is they go to the registry to take their ID in to change the address. We're going to need photo ID because we need to make sure that you are who you are, because your bank is not going to want to give you money otherwise. And when you get that temporary driver's license that says this is not valid ID, it's not valid ID. So it's really good to do that after you take possession again. You've got time. And I understand that it's exciting because it is a very exciting thing to get a new house. It's just one of those little hiccups that sometimes gets in the way.
Yeah, and we see that more often than people think.
All the time. Yeah. And it's one of those things that we go through waves. Or, if you've your ID is showing a different name that's on the mortgage because you've gotten married or divorced or whatever, it's really important that we have the documentation to be able to track that name change, or else we're kind of stuck. The banks are very, very picky, and understandably, about making sure that people are the right people. So you want to make sure that we have that same information on the banking documents as that we'll have on the contract, and that will have that in terms of your ID. So it's always good to use your proper name.
Right. And if the names are different, like last names, marriage certificate would be usually enough?
Marriage certificate, divorce certificate, yeah. Occasionally we run into some weird situations where there's people's names are so long it doesn't actually fit on their ID.
Oh, right.
But those are unusual and far in between. More often it's people getting married and divorced.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Excellent. I would usually recommend doing a 24-hour before possession walkthrough, just to make sure that there is no any damages to the property and the property is in substantially the same condition as it was during the showing. So it doesn't always happen like that. There are some things discovered during the walkthroughs, like broken appliances or some other damages that might occur. So how do you, Jeff, help your clients to overcome those issues that happens really usually even 12 hours before possession?
Right. So I guess this is a good news, bad news kind of thing. The good news is, not to deflect, but a little bit, there are parts of the contract that are very, very protective of a buyer. So like real property reports, if the seller doesn't have that, there's a lot of teeth in the contract to protect the buyer. However, there's not the same kind of protection if there's damage or something broken just before possession. So doing a 24-hour walkthrough is great because it gives us a little extra time to be able to communicate with the other lawyer, but it doesn't give us any ability to do anything. So it's kind of like in some ways, it's handy, but it gives a false sense of security because under the contract, a buyer is not allowed to just unilaterally hold back money without the consent of the seller. So you have to agree to it. Otherwise, the recourse under the contract is to sue for breach of contract, which is expensive. Even if you're doing it on your own, it takes up so much time. It'll be 2 or 3 years before you're in front of a judge if it goes to a trial. Like it's not the best situation.
Right.
So what do? Contractually, we can't. If a client tells us, hold back $200 because the fridge is broken, we could do it if our client instructs us to, but if the seller doesn't agree, the consequence to the buyer is it's breach of contract. They can take your deposit, not give possession, charge you interest at prime plus 3 on the full cash money until it's all given to them. Right. And I don't mean to be fear-mongering because 90% of the time we resolve things. Correct. Most of the time with that extra 24-hour walkthrough, it gives us the ability to negotiate and come to a resolution. So it's not the end-all be-all, but it's when there's an issue. We're fortunate that when we drive down an undivided highway with this much yellow paint to keep us from getting in a head-on collision, most of the time it really works, but when it doesn't, people get concerned. Correct. So to protect yourself, your option is to negotiate a holdback amount into the contract so that if the property is not in substantially the same position, the contract allows for us to hold back money. Now, some sellers, and I don't do your job, like I don't do the negotiation. Some sellers will be like, I just want to sell this house, like no problem. Some sellers, I'm assuming like, no way, like I'll sell it to somebody else. It doesn't hurt to ask, but that's just that at least ties up money that allows us to be able to hold back funds if there's a problem.
All right, Jeff, what about looking at a title with the buyer?
Sure, I think this is really important for all buyers. When you're buying a property, you want to really make sure that you understand what it is that you're getting. I think that's important. So the same as you wouldn't go view a house and take a client and say, look, there's the master bedroom, it's very nice, look at the living room, it's nice, look at the basement, there's the kitchen, don't go in the kitchen, you're not allowed to see that first. So having a look at the title is important because it's going to tell you some of the things you can or can't do with your property. For instance, if there's a utility right of way in the backyard, you can't build a shed, a garage, you can't build something on top of it. Some properties have restrictive covenants, and those will restrict you from being able to do certain things to the property. And some of the old ones are, you can't have livestock. Some of the newer ones are more along the line of architectural controls. You have to have this kind of roof, you can or can't have this kind of fence, you can't affect grading. And so it does two things. It lets you see if the house is in violation of the restrictive covenant, but as a buyer, it also lets you know what you can and can't do. So if you really like your privacy and love this house, but it has a chain link fence, some restrictive covenants will not allow you to put in a privacy wood fence. So that's something that would be important for you to know. So I think it's really important for people to go over the registrations on title. Obviously, if you have questions, you can help them. If you have extra questions, you can ask me, and we all work together for making sure everything goes smooth.
Excellent. Thank you. Jeff, can you share with me why a real property report is so important?
Sure. So the real property report, aside the fact that it costs almost $1,000 to replace it, so you want to make sure you keep it somewhere safe. But it's going to tell you a lot of things about the property. It's going to let you know if there's things that encroach onto somebody else's property, which the contract says the seller is not allowed to have. But it also lets you know if neighboring stuff encroaches onto this property, which the contract is silent about. So you can't hold the seller accountable for that. It also shows you, it's a visual description of where things like a utility right-of-way is, so you know where that is. If there's an overland water drainage right-of-way where you can't build things. So it gives you that kind of thing. And it'll also tell you where the property lines are. So we had a file where a buyer thought that the property line was where the fence was, but it was a boundary with a provincial park, and the fence was actually about 10 meters closer to the house. So they got a lot less land than they thought they were going to have, which could be a problem. But if you have that real property report, you know what's there. When you refinance, when you go to sell, you're going to need it, so it's important for you to have it. And that document is so important. If you don't have it at the time of closing, we've had situations where buyers have walked away and even sued the seller for a breach of contract, not being able to sell the property. So they're really, the contract is very protective of a buyer with the real property report. And it does show you a lot about the property. Sometimes people will say, oh, can we just get title insurance instead of a real property report? If you're a seller, that's great because you're going to save $1,000. But if you're a buyer, not so great because the real property report you're going to need in the future. And then if there's a problem you discover, maybe it's insured, maybe it's not, but you have to deal with it versus the seller dealing with it. And then you're still in the situation where you're going to have to pay for one to be able to, when you sell the property. So, would I say title insurance instead of? No. If it's going to be late, title insurance in conjunction with the contract's obligations to provide it, fantastic. But it's really, everything's negotiable. If you plan to just tear down everything on the property so there's nothing left structure-wise, then it really doesn't matter.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. Excellent. Well, Jeff, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, and always feel free, call, email, whatever, if you have questions.
I appreciate it. And thanks everyone for watching. Please don't forget to subscribe to my channel for more great videos.
Bye.
Bye.